Hello and welcome to the Single Malt Frontier, where we explore the edge of innovation in American single malt whiskey. Here on the show, we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually, we talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations that we get to have along the way, and we get to talking about a little bit of everything. Uh, Today, we are doing something a little bit different. Today, I am your host. I'm Philip. I'm admin of the Whiskey Lodge, co-host of the Single Malt Frontier, and I am joined uh, for a time by Doug, who is currently on break from the show.
It really looks
Um,
like it, doesn't it?
yeah, um, and as I joked somewhere, I'm not sure where, our once and future co-host Ian.
Hello. Nice to be back on here.
I'll hold you to the end future. Was that an Ian promise?
No,
I mean,
that was a me joke.
no, I can definitely come back on once in a while. Things have been rather busy in my in sort of evenings for a very long time at this point. But we'll probably get into that a little bit here and there during the course of talking about the whiskey and whatnot.
And today, as you might have guessed, we're talking about storytelling and brand communication, specifically as it involves whiskey and whiskey marketing. And we've asked Ian to rejoin
Come
us.
gripe about my job.
Well, I wouldn't say gripe, but why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you do?
So I am a number of things, but most primarily, I do front of house at Whiskey Del Bac. I do a lot of the tours, along with some of my other tour guides and whatnot. I do events. Sometimes I and some others will go out to places to present our brand and to present our whiskey to people that might not have heard it before. We will do various events both at the distillery and outside of it. I am not personally involved in production. Sometimes I sneak back in and stare at the distillers from afar and whatnot and smell whatever they've got going on back there. But I do not touch it really at any point before it's actually created.
I'm really sorry, Ian. That just conjured in my mind a horror movie-esque moment of Mark Fiertaler kind of looking over his shoulder and seeing you silhouetted in a doorway in the distance.
I've been at the distillery many times, very late at night actually. I often close up there, and it is not the most pleasant thing to be alone with all that, just sort of very tall machinery and all the barrels and whatnot. I will be honest with you.
Closest I've been to that is after I recently interviewed Mark for the Crafted Conversations podcast as a co-host there. Everyone kind of went off and did meetings, like it wasn't a production day. So like Mark was in a conference room speaking with I don't know, some business representative or something like that. And like the distillery and the bar and everything, like lights were off basically, right? So
Oh
I was
yeah.
just like hanging out in the distillery, eating a muffin, and finishing my glass of whiskey from the interview at like 11:30 in the morning, mind you, because that's how filming goes.
Yeah.
But late night, I bet that would be really creepy. Late night lights
It
off.
is. It is strangely creepy. I mean, I work there all the time, so it's also like it's not a very large space as far as distilleries go. It's really just one long, very wide warehouse. But there's a lot of places for little things to hide, like our cats and things like that. And that's not always the most pleasant thing in the world to find running underneath your feet. Um,
The cat's not the mice they're chasing, right?
there are no mice in the distillery. The cats have never caught a single mouse in their life. Um, none of. I've never been aware of a cat that lives in our distillery catching a mouse before. Our previous cat, Two-Row, caught a bird one time, but it had concussed itself on a window first. And our current cats, Pablo doesn't do anything. Living a very wonderful life up in the front of house. Waldo will hunt things, but he exclusively tries to sneak out the back door, and he'll run back inside with a bird or more oftentimes a lizard. So not necessarily the things that we want him to be hunting, but we don't really have too big of a problem with mice around here. We keep a lot of our grain suspended and things like that because there are a lot of pack rats and things like that that live around Arizona, and they will get in if given the slightest chance.
That is an interesting. I had never thought of suspending grain like a bear bag to protect it from mice before.
It's kind of like that. A lot of times we will be suspending it when we're sort of moving it around, just for like from a forklift, essentially, when we're pouring it into different things. And a lot of times when it is actually just sitting in the warehouse, it is just giant, massive. I think 1 or 2 ton bags of grain just kind of sitting up on these big. I don't actually know what to call them. Those large scaffolding things like you'd see in IKEA or something like that. They can hold a lot of stuff.
And for those of you who have difficulty conceptualizing how much a ton is, the average automobile, 4-door sedan, weighs between 3,600 and 3,800 pounds. So just shy of 2 tons.
We will be we will be malting ourselves actually about 2.5 tons of grain every month. And as for going through, we might be going through 3 or 4 tons of grain a month when we're in like full steady production. But don't quote me on that because my numbers are sometimes a little bit off the top of my head.
Speaking of quoting, one of the reasons that we asked you here is because we had on other occasions briefly touched on like telling stories as an element of brand communication, and like the stories of how distilleries start. And as an aside, Whiskey Del Bach's origin story is a great story.
Oh yeah.
But we kind of wanted to talk about, how brand communication works and how storytelling and building stories helps to build brand mythos and whatnot.
So I think that, yeah, sort of the first thing that I would like to, how to say, position here, maybe that's not quite the right word, but sort of talk about is like how we're defining sort of these stories and whatnot. And if I may put forward something, and we can debate this later on if that's what you all would like to do. But stories are sort of all the ephemera tied around the whiskey itself. When you're not selling the whiskey on if it tastes good, when you're not selling the whiskey on sometimes even having a nice label or something like that, a lot of those things are going to be the story. And specifically the story that we're talking about right here is how the whiskey started, which is also itself a little bit different than how the whiskey is made. We'll talk about that in a second. Mm-hmm. But to sort of give a brief overview, I suppose, at Del Bach, we are not a very old distillery. It started technically back in the mid-2000s, around 2006, when our founder, Stephen Paul, started distilling whiskey out in his backyard because he was a furniture maker working with mesquite wood primarily. And his wife, Elaine, was a big fan of Scotch. He wasn't really that much of a Scotch drinker at the time, and he much preferred Macallan, the more unsmoked styles, or the less smoky styles of whiskey, I should say, whereas his wife much preferred Islay Scotches from her time drinking a lot as a lawyer, is what she told me. So she wanted to know if he could make this kind of mesquite flavored whiskey like you would get peat flavored whiskeys from back over in Scotland and Ireland and places like that. And he started trying to do this on this tiny, tiny little still in his backyard. Most of it turned out real bad. So when you over smoke with mesquite wood, it turns out this very kind of, what's the word for it? Cigarette ash sort of flavor, unfortunately. If you've ever had a mesquite fire and you douse the flame, and you're smelling that smoke afterwards, a lot of that sort of wet coal kind of damp tobacco sort of smell to it. But he got a bit better at it back in 2009, moved up to a larger still, realized that wasn't strictly legal after his daughter told him. And both him and his daughter started trying to make a distillery. If memory serves, this isn't usually part of the story that I tell, but it was only rather recently that distilleries started popping up back in Arizona at all. I believe that legally it was sort of an odd situation for many, many decades there. But they kind of figured that out. They were distilling out of his old furniture workshop for a time, and then started actually commercially distilling a fair bit after that. And this is kind of the bit that I, as someone sort of behind the scenes, would like to sort of point out one of the really interesting things. The bit before, the story that we tell is, while deeply connected, very different than what we actually do. These days, while Stephen is still very much working with us and everything like that, I just saw him today. He still runs a lot of the stuff on the front end. The person who is in charge of making our whiskey is Mark Viataler, our master distiller. He's fantastic. And Stephen has a say in some of the things, but Mark has the final say these days. The actual process that we go through now is so different that it sort of grew out of what Stephen had originally envisioned. And the story that we tell is, where am I going with this? The story that we tell is almost like this sort of seed that he planted. We're doing so many different things. We're doing things at such a larger scale that it's kind of unimaginable that it came from just this little 4.5 gallon still in his backyard originally. So these stories that we tell is kind of why I describe them as ephemera almost. They are things that you hold on to while you're drinking the whiskey, things that can very much influence how you experience it, but in and of themselves, they do not affect the whiskey. They are not necessarily what the whiskey is now, I think I would say.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. And I would like to point out that that Whiskey Del Bock has, as an origin story, one of the most down to earth that you frequently see brands that have like a sort of incredible story that true to the meaning of the word incredible, sometimes you wonder about. But there's there's something of like a sort of not mundaneness, but a plainness to the story that I think speaks to the sort of general attitude of the brand when talking about it itself. Both the brand and the whiskey, there's sort of a plain-spokenness to the Del Bock story. And I think that is one of the ways that story sells the whiskey.
Very much so. We one of the interesting things about sort of more largely on the brand itself, and we had talked about this a little bit before I came on today. As far as that, I didn't necessarily want to represent the brand today so much as I just wanted to speak as an individual. And a large part of that is that Del Bock as a brand exists in a lot of different ways, primarily because we as the employees get a pretty large amount of freedom on how we interact with our customers, with our consumers that come into the distillery. Each one of us has a very different version of the story. My coworker Carlos actually knew Stephen back in 2006. He was around when all that was happening. He has such a different version of the story. My coworker Jeff, I believe he once trained as a pastor for a little while. So he has a very different cadence, a very different way of telling that story. And in each one of those, you're going to get these kind of different versions of it, these different sort of little bits and pieces in the ways that we all kind of interact with that story ourselves. And in this way, it's a lot less of this kind of incredible sort of like miraculous beginning to a brand, to a thing. A guy's wife wanted some whiskey at some point, and they really liked drinking it. And that's sort of the basic version of this, and the thing that sort of stays the same among all of these different stories that we tell. And you can just go to the distillery and just kind of see Stephen doing things sometimes. He's in some ways this sort of mythical founder, and in some ways this kind of just guy that walks around with his dog at the distillery quite often.
I mean, if I could have any job in the world, it would be to walk around at a distillery with a dog. Just saying.
Oh yeah.
I know that there's a lot more to the job, but boy, that sounds like
Yeah.
fun. Well,
I don't begrudge him having to sit in on the meetings and everything like that. Not really my cup of tea personally. But no, he is very much a down to earth guy. He was actually, when I first got hired at Del Bach, I had sent an email. I'd had a good word put in for me with Mark, but the first person I ever met at Del Bach was Steven. I just walked in one day when I'd first moved out here to Tucson, and walked in, and he was just behind the bar, and he poured some whiskey, and we just chatted for a while, and I went in for an interview the next day. So he's just there. Yeah, it's a very fascinating thing, and it's a very interesting thing to have this control over the story that is told about the distillery, because a large part of the story that I like to tell during my tours or when I talk with people about this is both what Stephen originally planned on, that seed that he kind of planted a long time ago, and what we do now, the sort of ways that both he and other people like Mark have kind of figured out how to work with the desert and with this kind of climate to actually make the whiskey and make a very interesting spirit in that regard.
so that involvement, I think, of the founder in sort of perpetuating the story, and combined with the fact that if you're at the distillery, you might actually meet him, kind of is an interesting thing to think about, because a lot of times when people think about like big brands and the stories behind them, it's ancient, well, not really ancient, but really old history. I mean, talking about
Yeah.
brands that were founded in the 1800s, that the the old, there's a recipe in that safe over there that only two people have access to, et cetera, and so forth. That's not actually a whiskey brand, but that's
Right, the
sort of
Coca-Cola story. Yep.
right.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, it reminds
there's
me of Plymouth Gin. They have a recipe called the King recipe. They apparently found it in some old like bookkeeping or something like that in the distillery at some point when they were moving spaces, and it had two ingredients. It had juniper and orris root, and they remade the gin at some point. It's called Mr. King's recipe, and I don't know if you can find it in the States very much, but it's solid gin, quite honestly.
and
Two
and
ingredients. Nice.
that's
Yeah.
kind of an example of like one of the really common stories that you see from newer brands is, oh yeah, we found this recipe in a suit jacket pocket from my that was my grandfather's, when we were looking for a suit to bury him in, or
Also, by the way, the whiskey is MGP.
yeah, um or one of my favorites, this is a recipe that was written in the back of the family Bible. And it's one of those things where, like, as much as I love a good story, and as much as consumers love a good story, there is so much out there that is kind of, too good to be true, in a way that, like, there's obviously going to be elements of the story that are true, but the way that they've decided to spin it for marketing purposes really changes the nature of the story entirely. Um, and one of the problems that has sort of created is that now when you hear a story of how a distillery is founded, you ask yourself how much of it is true. And the cool thing about Del Bach is the founder is right there, and it is a very down to earth story. And there are a lot of distilleries that are like that, they were founded on the, I wanted to make something cool and different, and so I did. And there's an element of storytelling that I think is necessary, but where is the line?
Yeah, what does it say about us? Or I don't know, maybe I'm reading between the lines too much here, but what does it say about us, this particular group of people, that uh, the idea that someone did the pick yourself up by the bootstraps, make the thing you want yourself, is a more compelling brand story to us than something like old school Scotch that has been doing it the same way for 200 years. And like there's no end to variety of whiskey that you can have in either of those types of stories, right?
Right.
Like this specific whiskey hasn't been made before, but that doesn't mean that you're short on options, right? Just because there's 200 distilleries making it the same way they made it 200 years ago in Scotland doesn't mean that they're all the same as each other.
Right. There's a world of difference between Blair Athol from Auchentoshan and any of the distilleries on Isla. But there's I think that where the big difference is how the story is told. By the way, Ian, we're getting some interesting.
It sounds a little bit like a scuba regulator.
I was going to say it sounds like a
Oh.
dishwasher.
Oh yeah, like, what could
Interesting. I have no idea what that is actually. You're getting noises? Oh,
Yeah,
strange. I might need to turn something off. I'll be right back. All right. Well, I'll check that out in a second.
But
as long as we've been interrupted, what's everybody drinking?
I poured myself a little bit of whiskey Del Bach Dorado because we were talking about unique and interesting, and we're speaking with Ian, and I thought that would be appropriate.
Indeed. I went with the Del Bach Normandy in the American Craft Spirits Association class.
Wonderful.
This won an award this year.
That's exciting.
I have gone with, I believe this is the summer 2023 Distiller's Cut. There was a 1 year where we just decided not to add in the year on any of the labels for our Distiller's Cuts. So I believe this one was 23. Because 24 was bottled in bond.
24 has the spring 2024 on it, unless you mean summer.
So the summer was a whole different bottle. It was this fascinating kind of watercolor blue label because it was just a bottle in bond. That spring 24 is fantastic. A blend of a bunch of different kind of random barrels in some cases, if memory serves.
It works really well though. We talked about this one during our first interview with Mark.
Yeah. He put a bunch of work into that one in particular. I think that it turned out really well. It's one of my favorite ones that we have put out for the spring. This spring was also really good, but it was a Madeira cask primarily, so I'm a big fan of that, as it were. The summer Distiller's Cut was so for 2023 was, what was this? Rum, agricole, and tequila cask finish.
Huh.
Yeah, it was an interesting one.
And later, by the way, I'm going to pour this spring release, which is 2023 according to the back label, but doesn't say on the front label. And this is the bottle that Ian got for me at the distillery and sent me home with after ACSA.
One of my favorite bottles that we have put out, it was a port cask finish primarily, watered down to 52.5% or 51.5%, I forget, with a bourbon finished Petit O, whiskey that was watered down to 20% alcohol, essentially.
Yeah, so I asked Mark, I think off the air, about Petit O, and I know that you have a wine background, so I wonder if you could, since you've mentioned it, if you could expand on the concept.
So the basic concept is, I believe it is usually a blending process for cognac primarily. It is a French style of blending, wherein you take a primary spirit and a watered down secondary spirit, usually both of the same type, and you use the secondary spirit to proof down your whiskey to avoid losing flavor, ideally. As for how well it works precisely for a variety of different things, I could not say. I'll be honest with you, cognac isn't, especially fine cognac, isn't exactly one of my focuses. But it is, how to say, a great way that we use to add extra flavor to one of our spirits without putting in how to say, a whole secondary barrel, and to be able to proof it down to a place where we want to drink it as well. Because when we release our distillers cuts, we don't always want them to be full proof. We don't always want them to be 56 or 57 or 60% alcohol, however much they get up to. I think that one was that the green one right there, Phill?
Oh, I have Spring 24, which is
Beautiful.
56.5.
54.5.
Yep.
That one was an interesting one. I believe that one actually just came out of the barrel. It's lower than than our entry proof, which is unusual for our whiskey due to the climate and whatnot. But yeah, so Petite O is just a really good way of adding a little bit of flavor to some of the whiskeys without putting in a whole different foolproof barrel or something like that. A little bit of a softer flavor, especially, and with that much higher with much higher water content, you get out a lot more wood sugars from some of these barrels as well. So you will get a much sweeter Petite O than you would a much higher proof spirit.
And was there something about extracting, like, basically the devil's cut, so to speak, from the barrel in order to get the Petite O, or was that?
That's not necessary to a Petite O. I believe they don't necessarily do that in France and whatnot. But for us, that is pretty much always what we do. We always use our Petite Os as aged in other barrels. One of the other big reasons that we do it is because we're in such a dry climate. If we're finished up with a barrel for a while and we're not putting in a new whiskey right then to re-extract all that flavor, at some point that barrel is going to fall apart. It will warp, it will crack, and sometimes it will just kind of collapse in on itself due to just the lack of humidity around here. So you need to put something in there to kind of keep it alive. And in the case of the bourbon barrel that Petite O came from that particular whiskey, I believe that we had pretty much finished up using it. A lot of times we will keep a barrel around after it's done with its primary sort of active use, and keep it around for blending primarily. Like right now we have one of the barrels that we used to use for the Frontera, Pedro Jimenez Sherry Cask barrel that is about 125 years old or so, that is on its fifth use for our whiskey. So not much left going on inside of there, but we're keeping whiskey in there to extract what is left and use that for aging over the next couple of years. So a variety of different ways that we can kind of get those barrels to work for us between the Petite O and other types of blending going on right there.
Thank you for expanding our nerdy knowledge.
Actually, the whiskey that I'm having right now also was the sister to the spring one. A lot of people really liked it. The Petite O in this one is a tequila cask finish, which, funnily enough, we aged some of our whiskey in tequila casks. I believe they were añejo tequila casks, and didn't work out. Whiskey didn't taste good, at least not when we first gathered it up. But we would use it for blending, and it works very, very well in tandem with other flavors. Like, say, for this one, the very fruity, grassy flavors from the rum agricole pair very, very well with some of those sometimes darker, more vegetal tequila cask flavors.
It just occurred to me that I keep pouring things that aren't. We're talking a little bit about mesquite smoke, and I keep pouring things that don't have mesquite smoke.
It just occurred to me that someone asked a question a while ago in the chat. I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah.
Old Man's Irish Pub.
That's the Pawn in the lodge.
Oh, Pawn. Hello, Pawn. How are you doing? Now, as for I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't know if anybody's ever read Terry Pratchett, but he had a theory about cities. That cities, in the modern sense, with strip malls and shopping carts and snow globes and malls, were these eldritch beings that invaded your universe and started propagating themselves. And that's largely how I feel about Phoenix. There's a lot of stuff in Phoenix, and I have not been to most of it because it's really, really big. For Phoenix, there's some distilleries. I believe that one of the distilleries up there, adventurous stills just came under new management not too long ago. So I'm not sure what their new stuff is actually like, but feel free to pop on by there. There is also going to be several bars that I'm aware of. Rough Rider is apparently a really, really good bar that we have actually sent out one of our honey barrels to before. And we actually just bottled up a single barrel mesquite charcoal filtered rye and sent it up to Trevor's, a liquor store over in Phoenix. And that one was very, very tasty. It is MGP. We do not make rye at the distillery, but it is a barrel strength, very, very tasty version of the Sentinel right there. You'll be able to tell what it is in Trevor's because of the fact that it is those same colors, but reversed, actually.
Oh, that's really cool.
Oh, it's a very fun one. I just walked in the other day and they happened to be bottling that up when I was giving a tour. It was quite fun.
Don't mind me. I'm just wondering where I put my Sentinel.
Okay.
He's asking about finding Del Bach. I think we all misinterpreted that question.
Finding Del Bach. You can find it up at a lot of the Total Wines in places like that around there. I believe that Trevor's is one of our that I was just mentioning with the that was selling the Sentinel is one of our biggest people up in Phoenix, and so they are going to have a lot of Del Bach stuff. You won't be able to find the distiller's cuts, as it were, because they are distillery exclusive. But other things like our Normandy was just, I believe, sent up there. Our newest batch of Normandy has a little bit of smoke in it, which is very fun. And our Frontera, and maybe they'll still have a little bit of our Ode to Isla, our very, very smoked whiskey up at Trevor's as well.
That's one that I need to get my hands on.
That I can actually do for you. I've got stuff that is sitting around like on my shelves that I need to send to you. It's just been sitting around here for 2 years now, I think.
Was that one of the? You handed me the one that you had for me.
Yeah. But I have a bottle of Normandy from some years ago that I might send to Phill along with some of the newer bottles of Normandy so we can compare them. But I just still have it sitting around here on the shelf. It's staring at me right now, actually.
Yeah, I've got a lot of that sort of thing going on. I've got a box that I need to send to Doug, and I've got a guitar that I've got to send to Skip.
How many boxes do I need to send? Like at least 10. Like I just like.
And I've got a box that is packed up that just needs a label that I need to just do. Ship
I've got so many of those.
Bartlemay.
It's just you got to get on that.
I really do have to get on that.
It's so hard to close the loop on sending a box, isn't it?
What's weird is it's one of those like it's sitting, and every time I get home from work, I go, I got to do that. Then I just don't.
You spent more time thinking about the fact you have to do it than it would actually take to just do it.
Yes.
If you could just find that block of time.
And that actually does. I just remembered something as well. Come to think of it, I need to send some things to my father, but that's just what reminded me. But no, there is a
back on the
Tom as well. There's a gin that I think that you should buy if you're interested at all in gins. That should be over at Trevor's. It's called Suncliff. We have in recent years become the primary supplier of barrels to Suncliff for their barrel rested gin, and their most recent version was some of our ex-Calvados casks that we sent out to them. And they make just some fantastic barrel-rested gin. Not too oaky, not too light, really lovely stuff.
I bet that's really good. And I know Pawn won't necessarily take it from us, but there are things other than whiskey that are worth trying.
It was worth a try.
Speaking of things other than whiskey that are worth trying, we were talking a little bit about rum before we started streaming, and how how stories sort of maybe run away with brands in rum in particular, because that's one of those places where for a long time rum was sort of the Wild West of spirits, because the rules for rum in a lot of places where they're manufactured are a little bit murky. One of my favorite examples of this is, for a long time, there was rum made in the Caribbean that, was all vatted and aged, and they could put an age on the bottle that was equal to the oldest element of the blend and not the youngest. So you had a lot of really high age statement rums that were primarily 5 or 6 year old rum. And that's neither here nor there in terms of the way stories run away with brands, but there are so many brands that have such fantastical stories that, if they were true, and okay, they may very well be true. I will grant them that. But if I read them and believed them, I would absolutely say that those are stories worthy of selling or buying a bottle of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes back to the, recipe found in grandfather's suit jacket pocket on the day that he was to be buried, sort of thing. Or an old Prohibition era moonshiner recipe. And, in Virginia, which is where I'm from, there is a portion of Virginia that is kind of jokingly called the moonshine capital of the world, because it's sort of a way of life in that region. And throughout Prohibition and beyond, it was sort of just where the most moonshine was made in the United States. There were more still busts in that region of Virginia than there were in the rest of the United States combined during Prohibition, or attempted still busts. A lot of them were, oh yeah, there was somebody distilling here until relatively recently, and that sort of thing. And there are a lot of brands in that region that currently make moonshine or aged whiskey that do have direct connections to actual convicted moonshiners. Twin Creeks, for example, the founders are, I believe, the grandson or the great nephew of Peg Hatcher, who was, I believe, the only person convicted in the Franklin County moonshine conspiracy.
Ooh, that sound is back.
Yeah, I wonder if that.
The sound. Let me see something. I'll be right back.
All right.
I wonder if it's like just that he's like quiet long enough that the mic gain starts to come up.
That is entirely possible.
We'll never figure this out. It wouldn't be a show without technical difficulties.
Yes.
I'm sitting in a very well ventilated area right now because I have to be. I have just tested it by turning off the ventilation, or at least, better idea probably would have been to just point the fans away from me. But we'll figure that out and see if that works. Is it still going on right now?
I do not currently hear it. I will say, you mentioned earlier that it's 105 degrees outside. Probably should keep at least some ventilation on.
Yeah, if you need the
I'll
fans,
be turning it on.
Fans.
Yeah, no, I'll be turning it back on in a little bit probably. But it's peak time during electrical usage right now, anyways. So I don't want to have them very much, anyways. Also, I live in a little adobe house these days, so the actual the temperature actually doesn't really get above 85, even when it does get up in there, which isn't the most pleasant to live in, but it's better than outside. Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
But one of the most interesting things about rum as well that we're talking about, to go back to that a little bit before we continue on with moonshine right there, it's one of the fascinating things about, to me, about sort of both moonshine and rum, is that with moonshine it it was not legally acceptable for quite some time. I mean, technically, moonshine, if you think of it as illegally distilled spirit, is still not legally acceptable. But socially, it wasn't always acceptable either. And that has come into be a sort of sign of authenticity and credibility. Whereas rum has had this sort of opposite journey almost, I feel, where a lot of places with rum, we were talking about Plantation, who had changed their name to Plantaray much more recently, sort of dealt in these terms and this history that was for a long time socially acceptable to deal in, and has now more recently become less. It has become less socially acceptable to sort of deal in the terminology of chattel slavery and things like that, especially, which has a deep connection with rum and things like that, as well as some, I think, more recent pushback against other things like the tiki cocktail movement and the way that that sort of uses indigenous sort of iconography and things like that. That's a whole other situation right there as well. And I think that that's also a very interesting way that sort of these stories can run away with their brands, to use the term that you mentioned earlier, Phill.
Yeah, I mean, and sort of what I meant there was that there are definitely brands that have a story that the story is so much a part of the brand that it carries the brand more than the product itself. And the way that the story sort of comes before the brand and keeps the brand from doing new things, or the story has morphed into something that is far larger than the brand. Are you using open back headphones?
I'm hearing that too.
No, I'm using I'm using a whole other microphone and very tiny little headphones. I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
Somehow we're
no,
getting
is
a
that
little bit of
me?
bleed through from. Oh, is it you, Phill?
I don't
No.
think.
How
It's
could
me.
it be?
No, I don't think so. I suddenly had that thought that I'm using a very, very good microphone, and I don't think these are open back, but I have the volume up because one of my ears doesn't work very well.
But I don't think your headphones would be playing back your own voice, right?
I wouldn't think. Oh, well, I do have it set up so I can hear my own voice, because if I can't hear my own voice, it sounds really weird. If I can't hear my own voice when I'm talking, like if I have headphones on and I can't hear my own voice, I start to lose like concept of where my voice is at in terms of like pitch and like volume normalization, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally.
I have the opposite problem. If I'm not wearing the noise isolator.
Give me a second. The wind is destroying my house, apparently. I'll be right back.
Oh no.
Just like old times.
Oh yeah. I will admit I have
when I had to take these off. Sometimes I have audio difficulties with the Bluetooth. Whenever I have to take these off, it takes me a long time to adjust to the volume of my voice in this room without that barrier.
I mean, I'm running through an interface that allows me to monitor my own microphone or not monitor my own microphone. And in the first episode that we did where I was using this interface setup, I had that turned off. And when I listened back to it, I could hear the pitch of my voice oscillating as I was like trying to figure out where I was speaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We just talk.
Yeah. I have missed both of you, and I've missed having like a much more casual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And like as much as our interviews are typically more informal, having like a more general conversation is a lot of fun, and I've missed that a little bit.
Yep.
I am back, by the way. A storm is rolling in, and all of the gates and the outer doors started kind of slamming simultaneously just now.
Are you sure you don't have a haunting?
Well, I'm not exactly sure about that.
Little flickering lights.
It's the ghost of Turo. He didn't like you speaking ill of his.
Turo is still alive.
Oh, he is.
Turo just retired. Turo is living at
Oh.
Mark's house now.
Oh, I thought.
Yeah, she's doing great.
Well, I'm not ruling out the possibility that cats can astral project and mess with you if they sense you
Look.
speaking ill of them.
They
Certainly
have
not.
9
No,
lives,
yeah, that's true.
right? So they could still be alive
They
and
have
have
9
8 lives.
ghosts. Yeah. Okay.
Oh man.
Oh, that's awful. I hate that.
Man,
Okay. I wanna like recenter this conversation in maybe
Sorry.
a little bit of a different way, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So we can talk about the way we have talked about the way that Del Bach tells the brand story. I want to ask you, Ian, in your history of giving tours, do you get people that like come to you and say that they resonated with the story different because they didn't like XYZ about some other distillery? And I'm realizing now that if the answer to this question is no, this is about to be really boring.
Well, I mean, not in those exact terms. I think that a lot of people feel a lot more comfortable with. So, actually, yes, the answer is yes, and not exactly in those terms. One of the
Pipeline,
things.
thanks for stopping in.
Hey, have a nice time. Have a nice day. But one of the things that is interesting about our distillery is that we are a very diverse group of people. We have a lot of women working for us. We have a lot of our employees are gay or non-binary or trans or other various different orientations or cultures and whatnot. And I think that a lot of people find it a lot more comfortable sort of interacting in that space because of that. Now, that's not necessarily directly related to the story, but I think that it ties in with the sort of down to earthedness of the story in some ways. A lot of people associate a lot of alcohol, whiskey and wine, I think, especially, with being this sort of very bougie or in some cases selective kind of club that they can't get into. So around here, we're seeing a lot more. I'm seeing a lot more women who are getting into whiskey and things like that, who I think resonate both with the story of Stephen and just sort of like how kind of basic it is in many ways, and how there isn't this sort of like grandeur about the whiskey itself, but also the people that are telling these stories. And how they're able to interact with us as well, I think. So yeah, I do think that there is a sort of way that people are interacting with our story that is going to be a little bit different than especially some of the very, very large or very prestigious distilleries as well.
On that note, I would like to say that to sort of build on that and sort of steal something that Coming Whiskey was posting about doing a talk about. One of the things that is like a big part of a lot of whiskey, in particular brand marketing, is the and you know so Coming Whiskey posted about what are some trends that you'd like to see go away from whiskey, and what are some trends that you'd like to see continue. And my response on Threads was and was echoed in the comments on Instagram, was a lot of the marketing towards the manly, rugged, rough, sort of, this is we make the manliest whiskey for the manliest men who man sort of attitude that not a lot of, but there is a strong marketing presence of in the spirits industry and whiskey in particular. And I think that sort of that as an element of the stories for a lot of distilleries does sort of turn off or push away people who do not fit that description or who don't feel comfortable in those spaces because they tend to breed those, spaces where that is the attitude tend to breed other issues, homophobia, misogyny, and the like. And the um like you said, the representation of the people in the space and the straightforward and plain spoken nature of the Del Box story, I think, is a great example of a brand that doesn't touch that sort of rhetoric and is all the better for it, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that this is I was talking with my partner D about this before I came on to the podcast, and that's what they were saying, that they felt that was a big part of Delbox kind of brand as a sort. But what we also kind of have to consider is that the way that I interact with Delbox brand, the way that people interact with Delbox brand through me, is very, very different than the way that you all or people who aren't coming to the distillery are going to be interacting with that brand. We have, I think, a very different appearance to people who are from out of state or who are hearing about us through news or people talking about us or just through drinking the whiskey. There is a lot on, say, on our website, a lot more about Stephen and his family's history and things like that. I forget exactly what the whole thing is. I think his family was some of the first people to bring date palms into the Southwest, which was a whole thing back then. But without going to a distillery like this, and this isn't true of all places, it's kind of like ordering your food through like DoorDash or something like that. You are getting potentially excellent food, really, really good food. But I think that there is an aspect of the process of sort of the actual whiskey that you can only sort of find by being in the space that it is made and like talking to the people who make it in some ways. I think that this is sort of a maybe not fundamental part of it. I believe that I can drink a perfectly good rum and really enjoy that rum, for instance, without going down to Jamaica. But there is an aspect of this that is only present in that interaction, as it were, as well. And so I think that this is also a sort of fundamentally different brand in some ways than the one that we present online, than the one that we present to our customers in other states and things like that, where there is, I think, a lot more mystique around the desert, a lot more sort of like almost sort of deserty cowboy-esqueness of it all in a certain way. Whereas if you come to the distillery, we're all just random nerds who are just really into weird stuff, quite honestly.
I hope you will pardon me, but would you say it is the mystique of mesquite?
Yes, very much so.
That could have been a lot worse. I appreciate it.
Sorry,
So,
I heard those words.
Having been to the distillery, Whiskey Del Bach, I mean, I think a lot of people have in their mind about a distillery that visually it's going to look like these pictures you see of driving up to Lagavulin on a boat. And you've got this architecture that screams this is a distillery and beautiful scenery around it and whatnot. But a lot of American distilleries, especially American single malt in urban areas that I've visited, if they've put any effort at all into their external appearance, it's really just to put lipstick on the pig of being a industrial building, so to speak, right? And yet, in my head, Delbach doesn't look any different from those other places now, right? It is a place that they do floor malting, and that is like a piece of iconography that stands out in my head. You've got the mesquite, the smoker, you've got the stills, you've got the barrels, and like I think maybe it's my vision of a distillery is what's inside it and like what the pieces are that go into making the product. But like even knowing what the outside of it looks like, I think it's just because the story of the brand is so strong with me that even though I've seen it, my feeling of the brand is these things, right? That go into it, the malting, the mesquite, the stills, the label on the bottle, like this is the brand, and the people, the faces of the brand, Mark. I mean, for me, that's what the brand is. That's what I love. I really personally, like, as I've started saying more and more often, I really connect with brands by the people that make it. I think the people representing a larger group of people than just the trend towards machismo that a lot of whiskey does. That's a big part of it. Even though, quite frankly, the main face of the brand Del Bach is Mark. Your typical nerdy white guy.
Yeah. One of the first things that anybody says to me, but pretty most people say to me when they first come into the distillery is, "Oh, I didn't expect this to be back here."
Right? Yeah. Now that I've been there,
or
you
they
said that
say
to me
that they got
before.
lost trying to get to the industrial park.
Yeah, right. You said that to me before, but I did not fully import what it meant until I myself tried to get the distillery and went, "Am I in the right freaking place?"
Everybody does that all of the time. We put up signs. It doesn't help. It's
Case in point, I don't think I saw a sign.
we
I
didn't
went in
have
the
the signs
back
up when
way.
you were here. The signs were a recent thing.
Okay.
I think that, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but there are so many craft distilleries that are just in whatever building they could get their hands on. Like, for example, Catoctin Creek is in a 120-year-old, I think, former factory building that's on Main Street in Percival, and it's a beautiful building, but I don't think you would look at it and go, "Oh yeah, that looks like a distillery." Copper Fox is in an old motel, or their Williamsburg facility is in an old motel.
Um,
The what was once the motel front office is where their still house is, and their like gift shop and tasting room. And then they've converted the like rows of motel, like separate motel room building parts into the grain milling facility, the floor malting facility, barrel storage, and then on the other side, the bottling line. And genuinely, when I went to visit, we almost drove right past because I had only seen like pictures of the like sort of around the front door of the Williamsburg facility, and so we almost drove right past it, going, there's the motel. I don't see a motel on the map of like of like, yeah, because when you're driving, you've got like the little like GPS dots that are like various things. But I think that sort of not being what you expect based on the outside of the building is another just sort of interesting aspect of American craft distilling, because all the distilleries in Scotland are in buildings that were built specifically to be distilleries. And like there are a handful that were built to the design of the architect Charles Doig. And a lot of distilleries that were built afterwards kind of copied elements of that design. So there's sort of a architectural language of distilleries in Scotland and in Ireland that is just totally absent within the United States, with the exception of the really big guys in Kentucky and Tennessee.
There's Mark and everything like that. Apparently, have very wonderful buildings and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to remove that. Doug's
Beautiful.
and he's
He has
back.
Oh well, he's back. Oh wow, unexpected.
I may pop in and out for a few minutes.
Okay,
Sorry.
Understandable. Go on with what you were saying, Phil.
And I think that feeds into a little bit of the marketing and brand sort of recognition and communication, because like when you think of Jim Beam, you think of the big white Jim Beam rick houses that are way bigger than you think they are, by the way. For those listening who've never like been near one or seen a good picture that's like a good comparative picture of like something that you know the scale of, and one of those rick houses, they are gigantic. Yeah, but when you think of Jim Beam, you think of those big white rick houses. When you think of and now I'm going to embarrass myself because I don't remember what brand it is, but there's a brand that has, the big painted black rick houses that have the more standard roof type, as opposed to the roof line that the Jim Beam rick houses have, that have like a little clerestory along the top.
Be sure at all.
And when you think of Maker's Mark, you think of the Maker's Mark house that's on the distillery property. And like those have become part of the brand. And so you have all of that, and then you have craft distilleries that don't have the same kind of like locational landmark per se. And I think that affects the way the story is told.
Because you said the Maker's Mark house, and I was like, I don't know what that looks off the top of my head. They have a Hobbit house at Maker's Mark?
I didn't think it was a Hobbit house.
No, they have a regular one too, but they also have a Hobbit house.
Huh.
It looks adorable.
Is the front door, because Hobbit house doors are round, is the front door of the Maker's Mark Hobbit house a big barrel head?
Wish it was. It does not appear to be. No.
Oh.
It's like a shingled round door, it looks like.
Oh.
Yeah, it is a shame.
Okay. I have a new plan for our personal distillery, and by personal distillery, I just mean a commercial distillery that we start.
Okay.
Whole complex, Hobbit houses. We'd have to mow the roofs, but it'd be fun.
Yeah. That seems wonderful. Actually, it would give you some good access to some much cooler areas down in the underground and whatnot.
So, because you mentioned it, cooler areas underground. One of the other things that has become part of the stories of distillation or distilleries in the U.S. versus the rest of the world is, in Kentucky in particular, you have the great big rick houses where at the top floors you have huge temperature swings, and it gets really good airflow and whatnot. And at the bottom you have much less temperature swings and much less airflow. Versus in Scotland, where they typically do a much lower slung dunnage style, where the temperature is kept much more even throughout the year, and it tends to be cool and damp, which is one of the reasons why you see much larger age statements in Scotch whiskey. It's one of those dots that a lot of people don't connect, is when you keep temperature and barometric pressure and whatnot as even as possible by limiting atmospheric interaction or temperature swings, you're reducing the amount of interaction between the spirit and the barrel. And that means that you can let a whiskey age for much longer before it becomes over oaked. But, in the US, it's harder for a lot of these craft distilleries to tout their barrel warehouses, because for the most part, craft distilleries have very small warehouses, and they're not as exciting as the big Kentucky rick houses. How does Del Bach store barrels?
Right next to our fermentation vats on the distillery floor.
Okay.
We have pretty much all of those things that you just listed. The thing is that so a lot of the American climate is, in the way that I would describe it, dog shit for making European style just alcohol in general.
Mm-hmm.
You can get some interesting wine and some really good beer now that modern refrigeration has been sort of like implemented. especially and whatnot. But it is just a fundamentally different, kind of different process. They're a whole different thing to making, like you were saying, to making like whiskey and aging things than you would get in Europe and whatnot. Quite often. In our case, it is so hot and so dry around here that we only age our whiskey on average for about 1 year, although Mark has been experimenting and playing around with some older stuff, about a year and a half old right there. But we only have the barrels. Well, I should say we only have the room inside of our distillery. We don't keep our barrels anywhere else. It is just sitting right, just kind of catty corner from the still right there. Just sitting right on the distillery floor. We use a forklift to move them every once in a while, and they'll age real fast and real hard with that very dry desert climate right there.
And like so sort of on the other end of the craft whiskey spectrum, I would say that Virginia Distillery Company is still craft. Some people say that they are bigger than that. But they have a separate barrel storage warehouse, and they have everything palletized and, basically sitting upright on pallets and pallets stacked. And it is genuinely impressive, but it isn't as picturesque as the Scottish dunnage warehouses or the Kentucky rick houses.
I get as picturesque as the Scottish stuff, but I've just seen the message that Doug has put up on the screen. Overland Drams, your bottle and bond was amazing last year. Thanks so much. I think that for those barrels, those were the first time that we really experimented with new oak 53-gallon barrels, just your standard American barrels. Is it 52 or 53?
53. Cool. Yeah.
53. That was the first time we'd experimented with that. Mark has put the whiskey back inside of those barrels. Last I checked, he was hoping to age them for 6 years this time around rather than 4. I'm going to find out how that works, but put things in perspective when you're looking at evaporation of stuff in barrels, like what Phill was talking about earlier. When you're talking about Scotland, you're losing 1 to 3% of your whiskey every year to evaporation, depending on climate and a lot of other factors. And over here, we are losing about 15% of our whiskey in the first year and 10% every year after that. Most of what's evaporating is going to be water rather than your much more humid climates. We're going to be losing a lot of alcohol rather than that. But it's still a lot of stuff that's just the angels are taken up out of those barrels right there.
Overland Drams also says it was a worthy experiment.
Thank you so much. It turned out really, really well. We're hoping to do some more stuff like that in the future.
So, guys, I'm going to take about 5 minutes to kind of more gently make my exit from this show. You guys don't have to stop just because I leave. But I do want to steal the microphone for a bit and just assume that there is a world in which some people who listen to this show haven't seen my Instagram and haven't seen Discord and whatever. I try to keep my personal life out of the podcast as much as possible. So I didn't make any kind of announcement about this in advance, but as some people may have seen on my Instagram, I now have a baby boy whose name is Ian. And that name was chosen actually before I knew your name, Ian.
I didn't know that you would name him Ian until just now, actually. I didn't check his name.
So fun coincidence there. I'm not going to flatter you and say that he's named after you because I think that.
I don't think any baby should be named after me.
See, I made a joke in poor taste about that.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Oh yeah, I said the next kid gets to be named after me.
And thanks, Overland Drams, and everyone else who's saying congratulations in your head right now, or is going to find me on social media later to say so. So anyway, the reason that I've been taking a break from live content is because I'm using pre-recorded content to sort of give myself a bit of paternity leave, and I felt like I should hop on today because this is a throwback to the very beginning of this podcast, nearly 2.5 years ago, where Phill, Ian, and I just decided we were going to have a whiskey talk show, and we would find it along the way, and find it we did. But unfortunately, also along the way, we did lose Ian as a regular co-host. So it's good to have him back on every once in a while. And by the way, it was also really great to see you in Tucson.
Yeah, it was very
If anyone's
nice.
wondering what his
I'm glad you
face
got
looks
to
like,
stop
if anyone's wondering what his face looks like, go check out like the first videos on our YouTube channel.
by. Oh, yeah.
He's definitely up on there. We just didn't have a camera for him today, is all.
My partner stole it and put it at the University of Arizona.
Yeah. maybe we need to get you a second webcam for your house.
It should be fine.
Co-host. So thank you very much for this bottle.
Absolutely.
I tasted a little bit. I know that Phill, since I just opened it, I know Phill doesn't have a sample of this. But somehow you nailed my flavor preferences pretty much exactly. This is an amazing flavor profile for me.
So glad.
Thank you for that. And I might as well, this is the first time I've tried a bottle and also mentioned my son in the same sort of conversation. So because this is such a good fit for my flavor profile, and because it came from someone named Ian, I might just consider this my toast to the baby boy, because I also did about 3 weeks dry around the time of the birth, just because who has time for drinking? Right?
Oh my gosh.
After a baby. He's wonderful. Everybody's super healthy. Couldn't ask for a better situation as far as that goes. So that's me, revealing on air that I have a son, and that's great and all. There's another piece of completely unrelated news I'd like to share. Somehow in all this mess, I found myself as the author of an article on a soon-to-be-released magazine issue of and I'm going to blank on the name right now, so I'm going to look it up just to make sure. The Artisan Spirit magazine. It is not, in fact, an article about whiskey, but it is an article bringing my sort of expertise as a software engineer and a software security expert, or a computer security expert, to everyone who's got to work harder than ever to protect their digital identity. And that is apropos of this podcast. I don't think I've talked about this on air before, but I've been noodling about this idea for a while. Pretty much any one of the guests we've had on this show has given us enough video to make an AI clone of them. And if you let that sink in and you consider what I do for a career, I feel that even though it's not particularly self-serving for me to tell everyone, hey, watch out on how much video you're giving me, right? I'm not going to be the bad guy. But as part of people doing their jobs, showing up on podcasts and talking to people like us, they're giving potentially scammers all the ammunition they need to scam their loved ones. And so I've basically kicked off this series of articles that maybe they'll culminate in a conference talk at some point, where I sort of proof of concept. I'll take someone like Mark and make him say something that he never would have said. Nothing harmful, just something silly. And then sort of demonstrate how that could be used to put it through a phone voice filter, and place a call to your grandma and ask for $3,000 or whatever it is, right? It is just incredibly easy to get scammed these days, and the best thing you can do about that, especially when it is basically part of your job to make your face available on the internet and sell your products, is to start preparing your family, your loved ones, anyone that could be scammed by your likeness, to just be prepared to verify you in some way, right? That's the main takeaway, that this is possible and that there are proactive things you can do. And so I'm not going to get into the whole scope of what it is that I'm going to be doing, but there is a series of articles that I'm working on, and the first one has gone to print. And that's just basic software security recommendations, basic password security recommendations. So we're not getting into the deep nitty-gritty of it yet. We're just setting the foundation. This is my way of giving back to the distilling industry professionally, because what I do here as a podcaster is a completely non-professional. I mean, it's professional. We have professionalism, right? But it is not a professional pursuit. So it's my way of giving back. Why did I think I had a third thing to mention? But in any case, Oh,
I
go
have
ahead.
I have something much less impactful, but if you follow me on Instagram, I'm the Rangers Respite. You'll know that I am running the 4th annual Virginia Whiskey Tournament. And we are down to the penultimate bout, which is the battle for third place between the Spirit Lab Distilling Company and Hilltop Distillery. Both fantastic distilleries. Both distilleries that produce American single malt whiskey. I simply don't have any single malt from Hilltop yet. Polls for that close at midnight on Friday, and the following Monday, the final bout begins between the Virginia Distillery Company and Catoctin Creek, which is a rematch of the final bout from 2023. And that is all I have for that. I just wanted to piggyback on the announcements.
Vote for Catoctin Creek. I am uninvolved in the creation of that. That is my own personal opinion. Does not reflect the host of this podcast.
I mean, nobody has said it to me yet that isn't somebody who actually knows me and knows that it isn't the case. But I have 22 bottles of whiskey from Catoctin Creek. And I have repeatedly stated that they are my favorite distillery, but I don't get to choose. That is up to everybody else who sees the polls and votes, and it is always the distillery that has managed to cultivate the biggest community or impressed the most people with their whiskey who wins. And it's always been a good, clean competition.
Do you need to head out now, Doug?
I do need to head out. And you guys don't have to stop talking. Feel free to keep on framing whiskey storytelling as long as you'd like. But for me, I will say it's been super nice talking to you, gentlemen. And until next time, I'll see you in the lodge.
To little Ian.
Fun. Yeah, to little Ian, the
To little
smaller
Ian,
one.
not to be confused with the big one on screen.
Maybe he'll grow a big beard one day. I'm not sure.
All right.
Oh, Phil, what are you drinking now again? Are you still drinking that Del Bacca right there?
I have the 2024 Distiller's Cut, which I just posted to little Ian with.
The spring?
Yes.
What was that? Mostly cognac barrel with some single barrels and some Calvados cask in there, I think.
Cognac,
Maybe some PX as well.
PX sherry, rum agricole barrels.
Jesus Christ, we put so much stuff in that.
Bolstered by a single barrel chosen from our private barrel selection. Secondary finished in a cognac and Calvados, in cognac and Calvados barrels before being reblended, married, and bottled at cask strength.
That one was a particularly complicated one, to be quite honest with you.
It is beautiful. I think that it is fantastic.
Oh, it is a wonderful whiskey. Yeah. Now, did you have any particular questions about the presentation of storytelling in whiskey right here?
Well, I didn't have any specific questions. Sort of my plan was to just talk about, like, because you have experience essentially telling stories. And I don't think we mentioned it, but we know that you are or were a sommelier, and I know that part of being a sommelier is being able to basically tell the story of wine as you're serving it. And that, of course, is further experience in using storytelling in a marketing sense. And so I wanted to talk about the way that brands use storytelling to sort of bolster, their connection to the community around them and how they are perceived.
The how do I begin this in a good way? I think that for alcohol, especially, but this isn't really limited to alcohol, that the presentation of a brand or marketing to people begins with a very simple thing, and that's to assume that your audience is stupid. Sometimes that works for you, and sometimes that works against you. But in a lot of cases, I think that people are not educated about the spirits that they consume or anything like that. I've had many people come on tours and like stop me during the middle of the tour and say, "What is whiskey? You never explained to me what whiskey is." Um, and like that's a great time to go and learn what it is to actually be at a distillery and to sort of find that out. But I mean, like people will know everything that a brand tells them about aging, about wood, about things like that, but they won't really know what goes into making it before that point in many cases. And I think that that's a big part of kind of my job right there, to sort of education in the most basic sense of the word, to sort of like go in and tell people like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is how everybody does it, and this is how we do it. And they're similar in many ways and different in a couple of very notable ones. And I think that that is like how we were talking about rum earlier with the age statements and things like that. That is something that some people use to their advantage to like to have things where sometimes it's people look on a label and they see made in Indiana. They don't know that that's MGP. They don't really know what that means at all and things like that. And it's an interesting sort of situation. I think that a big part of my job as someone in a small craft distillery is much more geared towards education than it would be in a sort of larger brand in this way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that. I'd also like to pause and talk about the way storytelling is sometimes used. Um, I won't say wrongly because it isn't really wrong, but in a way that it's
It's
not
never
consistent.
wrong, but
I mean, sort of in a way that is inconsistent with fact. There
right.
are all sorts of stories from all sorts of distilleries, and I alluded to a couple of really specific ones earlier, and I'm being very careful not to share actual brand names. And the listener or watcher may decide that they think that those stories sound familiar, and they may be able to make a pretty good guess at who those brands are. But I won't say who they are. But there are all sorts of great brands that have great stories that are true, that are sourcing whiskey and being transparent about it. And sometimes it's sourcing and bottling in the manner of an independent bottler, as in the Scottish tradition, like Lost Lantern, where they've got a great story, they've got a great premise, and they're totally honest that you know they're taking whiskey made by others and they're shining a light on craft. And I will only name brands when it's a positive thing, by the way. Um,
Yeah.
there are the folks at the Lost Whiskey Company, who pick good barrels and are fairly transparent about their building a luxury brand about experience. And that transparency makes all the difference in the world. But there are other brands that tell a really big story about characters related to their distillery that are just characters. And it's hard to sort the truth, the fiction from the nonfiction, when it comes to these stories. Um, and I think that it is sort of on brands to who do spend lots of money educating the public. Even small brands spend a lot of time and money trying to teach the public about their spirits, but also spirits in general. And it's sort of become one of those things where there is sort of a hazy line. Because in storytelling, there isn't anything that is, and in fact, in reality, there isn't anything that is 100% the truth for every person. There, you see things from your perspective. So, like you said, different people at Del Bach, for example, tell the story through different lenses. And I guess I wanted to ask, as someone who does a lot of brand education and storytelling as an element of that, how do you feel about the brands that are rather loose with truth?
That's a really good question. I'm just going to ramble for a second and see if I come to something right here.
I mean, I've been doing that.
The fundamental truth of a story, of telling something like this, about making people feel in certain ways, because that is the goal of the story. The goal of the story isn't to educate. The education can come separately. It can be intertwined with the story. But I believe that the fundamental basis of the story is making people feel the way that you want them to feel from that story. And the fact of the matter there is that it doesn't need to be true. And I think that in many cases that is totally fine. You can absolutely make up an origin story, a little fantasy or something like that. One of my favorite, like I always get their little magazines. I don't order from them because they're very expensive. But J. Peterman, the little magazines, you open them up, and in next to each piece of clothing, it tells a completely fabricated story about that is supposed to make you feel a certain way. That is great. That attaches something to the clothing, to the whatever is in the little catalog, that is just really fun and wonderful. And I think that I start having a problem with it when it is actively misleading, because there are a lot of things about being a consumer, being someone who buys things, where you are being misled more or less constantly by one thing or another. And I think that people, not only do they should brands try to be, authenticity is a strange word for me, but I think that people desire it quite a bit. They want to know that what they are buying is in some way real. And to be very honest with you, the whiskey is always going to be whiskey unless you're buying it from a very shady source. I was talking with a man who is from Pakistan, and he and his friends bought some bootleg whiskey that was allegedly from Norway or something like that, and he was pretty sure that it had Vicodin in it. But it was a very interesting situation. But that's kind of neither here nor there. But it is sort of an issue when brands will sort of tell you something, sort of try to obfuscate what their whiskey is, where it's from, because the why of it doesn't really matter so much as the what when you are buying a product at the end of the day. Brands live and die by their stories, but at the end of the day, they oftentimes are at least selling a decent whiskey that tastes decent. Sometimes, but a lot of places will try to sell you a whiskey that tastes decent, and obfuscate. This is less common now, I think, than it was some years ago. But obfuscate what it was, what they did to it, and really focus in on the why they did it and what the story is behind that, to sort of try to obfuscate that thing about it they feel might make the whiskey less special to other people. One of the things that we've been talking about, the Sentinel whiskey from Del Bach, is from Indiana. It's from a place called MGP. They make a massive amount of rye whiskey. If you've had rye whiskey, you've had MGP. I have at least 3 bottles in this house right now that are from that one distillery that different people have done different things with, right? And when you do that, we take it in, we age it for a little bit longer, we filter it through mesquite charcoal. Tastes really different, tastes very interesting in my opinion. And doing that, telling people about it, that's fine. People can use MGP as much as they want. It's great to me, even if they have a story that they sell alongside it. If someone in their family used to make whiskey, or if they are even making up a story in relation to that is just sort of supposed to affect an air of authenticity or of elegance or something like that, and they still use MGP. That's great, so long as they do let you know that this is what it is, this is where it comes from. We don't really make it, but we are giving you this whiskey, or we are selling you this whiskey that tastes good and does what we want it to do.
I think that's the part that sort of gets into the different lenses thing, because I feel like to an extent it feels a little bit dishonest if you're not saying, oh yeah, this is sourced whiskey that we've done something to. If and there was a brand that I got into an argument with on X, or as it was at the time, Twitter, because they used some interesting language on their label, and did not list the state of distillation, but they put their mash bill on the side of the bottle, and their mash bill is 60-36-4, which is, as some people might immediately know, one of the 2 most popular bourbon mash bills from MGP. And I asked them about it, and I sent them an email because the wording that they used was finished, and there wasn't anything about what sort of barrel it was finished in, and I wanted to know, and I was curious because I couldn't figure out what it was, because it didn't taste like it had been finished in any sort of cask. So I asked them a bunch of questions, and finally got fed up because I hadn't heard back, and saw that they were active on Twitter. And so I said, hey, I know that you're sourcing from MGP. I just want to know what you're finishing this whiskey in, because that's what your label says. And they said that, oh, well, it's not finished. We just bottle it here in their facility. And I told them that it was really dishonest to have that sort of language on their label. And if I wasn't somebody who was in the know enough to immediately recognize the MGP mash bill, I would have never guessed that this whiskey wasn't something that they had made. I wouldn't have guessed, if I didn't know whiskey, that it wasn't actually a finished whiskey. And in response to that, they blocked me. And it falls into the category of, at what point does it stop being, telling a story and start being obfuscation, or sort of telling little lies that add up to a big lie.
I think that in many ways, all stories are full. In this way that we're talking about, I believe that in many ways all stories are full of little lies, right?
Right.
And I think that's a good thing, actually. I think that embellishment is a wonderful creative practice. But I do think that your end goal in this, the way.
Oh, I think I may have lost you, or maybe I lost me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I appear to have lost your audio, Ian, and I apologize. Let me see if. Oh, and I've lost Ian entirely. I think I know where you're coming from, and I agree that embellishment and sort of building the story is good, and every story is going to be a series of little lies, but hopefully you aren't telling a big lie at the end of the series of little lies, and I think that's where the line is for me. Oh, oh no. Well, in that case, I think what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up the show for now, because without our guest, unfortunately, there is no point for me to stand on a soapbox and for lack of a better descriptor, proselytize about marketing, which clearly I don't know a whole lot about. So until next time, thank you, Ian, for coming on to the show. Um, if you would like to ask questions of of me or indeed our guest, Ian, also known as Spooky Chicken, we are in the Whiskey Lodge. There will be a link in the description down below. If you are looking for a good place to talk about whiskey and related topics, and there's some off-topic discussion as always, the Whiskey Lodge is a great place to go. If you are on Instagram, give us a follow. We're the Single Malt Frontier on Instagram, and I am the Rangers Respite on Instagram. I'm running the Virginia Whiskey Tournament. This is the 4th year that I'm running it. We're on the penultimate bout. I'm sure both distilleries, either distillery, would appreciate having your vote. And I think that I shall go ahead and step down off my soapbox. Say thank you for tuning in. As always, we appreciate you, and we wouldn't be here without you. So until next time, we will see you in the lodge. Sláinte.